Hello BookTube, I'm Heather and this is Recently Seen Reading, and I have an update on how my no borrow month went. My goal for September was to not borrow any more books because my library shelf was full and it was actually overflowing. I had 30 books checked out from a couple of different libraries and it was bothering me. There's no reason for it to bother me at all. I mean, they're borrowed books. If I don't read them, there's a very simple solution, a solution I resisted. Just return them or renew them. Just return them. But I have difficulty with that. I'm not a person who routinely doesn't finish a book. I don't DNF. I tend to read the entire book or not pick it up at all. That means sometimes I end up hate reading books, and I'm trying not to do that either because it's not a pleasurable thing. So I started out with 30 books borrowed from the library, and I finished up 14, and most of them have gone back to the library, and I dipped into a handful of the others that I still have checked out. So it's an odd project, I think, in retrospect, to have done. The no borrowing did help me kind of slow my roll a bit and tackle some of the things that I wanted to tackle. It didn't, though, help me pick up books that are already on my shelf, and it didn't make me particularly happy with the books that I actually did read. It actually made me quite grumpy. Not surprising, I suppose. It made me quite grumpy because going to the library every week is one of the small pleasures that structures my life. And one of the things that no borrow did help do, and for this it was valuable, is it helped me discern some things about how my reading is going and about what shape it needs to take going forward. Some of these things are for other people maybe easier to discern, but for me I had to stop borrowing books in order to discern what's actually going on with my reading right now and my borrowing. So the big, not earth-shattering takeaway is that I tend to accumulate books that are about serious subjects. Nothing wrong with that. But I don't always read them. They become a little heavy for me and I don't make progress on them. And what the library borrowing enables, I think, enables me to borrow things like murder mysteries, romances, light reading, stuff that isn't particularly important or even particularly well written. And I think in a normal month, those I slot in between the serious and heavier books. I think most people call these palate cleansers. And I wasn't quite so clear on that was the pattern shaping my reading. So I got half of what I expected to read. I mean, in an ordinary month, I would, in years past, get through about 18 to 20 books. This month, less, 14 or 15. And that's the pattern I've been in over the last 3 months. So reading fewer books than I normally would, reading some longer ones, but mostly a slower reading pace for me. That's largely connected to the subject matter I'm choosing, some health issues that I'm wrestling with, and some generalized kind of unhappiness that flows from those things. I'm learning as a result of this no borrow month that I tend, yes, to read when I need distraction and when I'm unhappy. But too much unhappiness or too much ill health tips me over into the I'm not going to read anything camp. I'm just going to scroll endlessly on a phone or on a tablet or on a computer. And nothing wrong with scrolling or nothing wrong with distraction, but when I fill up my entire day with it, it's kind of demoralizing. So the no borrow has made it much easier for me to discern that pattern is going on in my life. So I'm very glad I did it, and very, very glad that it's over. I went to the library yesterday on the 1st of October and I picked up 2 or 3 things, and I'm looking very forward to reading them. So what did I actually read and enjoy? A lot of the stuff wasn't particularly enjoyable, so I only want to talk about a couple. I've read, let's see, I'm going to check my notes because my memory is not going to do it for me. I read Diane de Prima's Revolutionary Letters. These are very kind of prosy poems that she wrote in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s. She published them originally in the 60s, late 60s, and then revised them. So I read a version of Revolutionary Letters that was published in 74, I think. And they're kind of prosy poems, and they're kind of out of a kind of culture of hippies and diggers and anarchists. De Prima's grandfather was an anarchist, so they're poems that explore, in many ways, leftist politics of the 60s. And one of the things that startled me in reading a couple of these revolutionary letters was how familiar feeling the language and the rhetoric, the concerns, and some of the advice given in how to go to demonstration is. It's the same kind of language and concern that you'll find in contemporary leftist politics. Interesting, that startled me. And the other thing that I found interesting was thinking about how much my mother would have intensely disliked what De Prima was doing. De Prima and my mother would have been born in the same year or a year apart, so they were age peers, but their lives were entirely, utterly different, and their politics would have been utterly different as well. So it's that kind of interesting kind of, whoa, what's going on in this book, and why I enjoyed it and I liked it, and I'm interested in De Prima's politics, but she was very different from the woman who brought me up. So that brought an interesting kind of readerly pleasure to that collection of poetry. So De Prima is now on my borrow some more of this poet's works and explore a bit. What else did I read and enjoy? I read HD's Heliodora, which came out in 1924. I read it in a first edition. Let's see, yeah, this first edition. This is what it looks like in its first edition. I don't know whether it came out with a jacket, but this is what it looks like in the boards, and deckled edges, fairly straightforward approach to the print. And the thing that I liked best about this is that, let's see if you can see the book plate. There's a book plate. That's the book plate of Eliza Ritchie, who's a woman who I'm researching. I'm researching the history and disposition of her personal library and her family's library. She was the first woman of Canadian descent, so a Canadian woman, to earn a PhD. She earned a PhD in philosophy from Cornell in the 1890s. 1890, I think, actually, is when she finished. And went on to teach at Wellesley for a decade. And these poems are kind of standard imagist poems. Some of them I enjoyed a great deal, some of them not so much. What struck me most about this, and what makes, I think, an interesting collection if you're into early 20th century poetry, is how grief-filled it is. And I didn't expect it to be grief-filled, and I should have. The publication date gives it away. It's a 1924 publication, so the poems are coming out of that post-World War I, dealing with intense grief and loss. So they were far more grief-stricken and far more martial than I expected. And very interested in reworking Greek mythology, which I did expect going in. So I'm glad I got to read that one. Just looking at my notes now. What else? Oh, I finished Standard Canadian History, John Thompson's Canada 1922 to 1939 Decades of Discord. So basically the post-war period plus the Depression. And it's a very workmanlike prose. It's an old book. It's an old history now. It's came out in the middle 80s, the 1980s. And is likely been replaced by other accounts now, but this is the kind of standard text, so I thought I should read it to fill in some gaps, especially since the work I'm doing on Richie takes place in the 20s, partly and some of the other women's libraries and women's reading groups I'm looking at came together in the 20s and 30s. Very workmanlike account. What I value about it the most is its apparatus. It draws on census data and includes in the book big chunks of tables of census data and analyzes census data, which is really helpful when you want to make sure that the history you're reading is grounded in actual evidence. And the notes are good and the bibliography is fine if outdated. Useful too for placing the Depression in Canada in a historical context, because it was a different experience than I experienced in England and Europe, and a different experience than in the United States. So I'm glad to have filled in some of that, and it helps put some context around some of the reading I do around early Canadian communists of the 20s and 30s, and some of the kind of things you wouldn't have expected to have happened in the 20s and 30s that did happen in the 20s and 30s. Things like Section 98 in the Canadian Criminal Code, which made certain political beliefs illegal, and the beginnings of the padlock law in Quebec, which made the possession of certain kinds of books and certain kinds of ideas illegal. And the padlock laws continued for a long time in Canada. What else did I read? Oh, yes. I read Catherine Chen's Joan, which is a historical novel outlining the life of Jeanne d'Arc, and I really enjoyed this. I know it's not historically perfect or historically accurate, but there's something quite enjoyable about the way Chen imagines Joan's childhood and adolescence and how she's presented Joan as a figure of strength rather than a wispy mystic figure. I found that a very pleasurable book to have read. I only wish that I had read Chen's Joan after the next book I'm going to talk about. I read Fernanda Melchor's Hurricane Season, translated from the Spanish, and I've forgotten the translator's name. This book's been all over BookTube following its 2020 translation into English. And I don't know that there's many people who would actually say that they enjoyed the experience of reading Hurricane Season. It's a very dire book. It's a book about essentially femicide and sexual and physical violence in a tiny Mexican town. And there's no lights of optimism in the book at all. It's interesting in the way that Melchor can combine long, draggly, stream of consciousness like sentences with shorter sentences, and no paragraph breaks, and dividing the book up into chapters that shift my point of view, and still with all of that business going on and all of the dire subject matter, create a sense of forward movement, even though each section of the novel is kind of going over bits of the past. That's probably for me the most interesting thing about the novel. The subject matter is dire. There's only so much sexual violence or sexualized violence that you can read in a session. And I came out of reading this one with probably a week-long book hangover. I found it difficult to pick up other things. I did go on and read a range of other novels. I'll make a list of them down below so you can see what I actually got through. But Hurricane Season kind of made it clear for me that one of the reasons I need to be able to borrow books from the library is to borrow things that are lighter in tone, lighter in approach, so that I can continue to read, because that's my primary form of entertainment in an ordinary month, and my primary way of learning and engaging with the world outside myself. And without that ability, the Melchor book weighed heavy on me, and that heaviness kind of trickled over into some of the other books I read. Mixed results then for No Borrow September. Glad I did it. Unlikely to do another full month unless it's kind of a desperate plea for my partner to stop reading so that he can buy me a book. But useful for getting a sense of what my reading is like now, to getting some distance from it and being able to discern those patterns by having to look at my own grumpiness and unhappiness, and that unhappiness or grumpiness separate from having read Hurricane Season. Useful exercise for me. Not sure that I would recommend it for anyone else unless you have a very bad habit of borrowing books that sit on your shelf and you never get to. But I've gotten to. Look, there's a gap. There's a gap. But I'm about to fill that gap because I have picked up my first batch of books from the library. I have got, as first in my reading queue is Katherine Vermette's latest novel, the conclusion of her Stranger Family trilogy. This one, I think it's going to be too glary for you to see. This is The Circle. It came out in September, early September, and I had to wait to get it because I was on No Borrow. And I'm reading this, and it's very much like the first two books in the series. Multiple characters, multiple points of view, shifting points of view from chapter to chapter. Very quick moving, but I don't think I'm to the core of the book yet. I'm about a third through. Looking forward to reading that. And I've got a mystery novel. I've got Young Mungo, which I haven't read yet, checked out, and a stack of other things. So I'm very glad to be back to my normal borrowing patterns. I hope you've had an excellent reading month and that you have good reading in the future. And if you get into a slump, don't try a No Borrow month. Not a good plan. Bye-bye.